Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, China's factories taking a big blow as Trump's tariffs bite. How President Trump says his actions are impacting the Chinese economy, and what the new U.S. GDP numbers show about our economy. Iris Tao at the White House. The U.S. and Ukraine just confirmed that a deal on rare earth minerals has been signed. Wildfires blaze in Israel as emergency crews try to extinguish the flames. At the same time, fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism are honored on Israel's Memorial Day. Jason Perry reports. A man arrested by immigration officials for leading pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia universities has been released, and a judge is barring the government from removing him from the country. The Supreme Court considering whether to allow an Oklahoma charter school board to approve funding to a new Catholic school. Arlene Richards has what's at stake in the case.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A Ukrainian official is in Washington today. The U.S. and Ukraine just signed a deal on rare earth minerals. Here's more.
Ukraine's first deputy prime minister, Yulia Sviridenko, is traveling to the United States on Wednesday to sign a minerals deal. The two sides were reportedly set to close the deal on Wednesday afternoon until Ukraine requested some last-minute changes.
Yeah, our side's ready to sign. Ukrainians decided last night to make some last-minute changes. We're sure that they will reconsider that, and we are ready to sign this afternoon if they are.
President Trump wants to use Ukraine's minerals as a financial guarantee for the aid the U.S. has been sending to Ukraine.
I didn't want to make a complicated deal. I didn't want to make a deal that couldn't be made because Ukraine doesn't have very much money. They're going through a very bad period of time. It's been brutal.
But Ukraine's prime minister says the agreement won't include the money the U.S. has sent so far, only future aid.
No debts or aid that was granted to Ukraine before the deal was signed are not included in the deal. It is our important achievement reached in the talks with the partners. The deal only covers new contributions and new aid.
And Russia says President Vladimir Putin is open to peace. However, a spokesperson says it can't happen as quickly as the U.S. wants.
The peace process continues. President Putin's main goal is to achieve the aims he declared when starting the special military operation. We should secure our national interests.
Putin says some small groups of Ukrainian troops are still in Russia's Kursk region. According to Putin, they're holed up in basements and other hideouts asking to be evacuated.
It's impossible to evacuate because there are scattered groups of 2 or 3 people sitting somewhere in the forest, in some kind of holes, in complete isolation.
After the Kremlin's remarks, a Ukrainian official said Kyiv was ready for peace talks in any format if Moscow signs on to an unconditional ceasefire.
The U.S. Treasury and Minister of Economy of Ukraine confirmed that the mineral deal has just been signed. Wildfires continue to blaze in Israel as emergency crews try to put out the flames. For some residents, the fires have overshadowed Israel's Memorial Day. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
In Israel Wednesday, people were seen abandoning their cars on the highway as fires raged nearby. Others continued driving near the flames as smoke filled the sky. Wildfires caused by extreme heat and winds broke out near Jerusalem, and emergency crews tried to extinguish the flames. Israel's national security minister said winds were affecting their efforts to control the fire.
I spoke with the prime minister. I spoke with the minister of defense. We asked for the Super Hercules planes. These are planes that can work in any weather.
And soon after, the Israeli government said that Italy and Croatia would be sending firefighting aircraft to Israel as soon as possible. The wildfires happened on the same day that Israel was observing Memorial Day, in which they honor fallen soldiers as well as victims of attacks. Many people went to the site of the Nova Music Festival, where on October 7, 2023, Hamas terrorists killed hundreds of civilians. The father of one of the victims said he visits the site every other week.
My daughter was murdered and left behind 3 grandchildren, soon 17, 12, and 10.
Fallen soldiers were also honored in Israel, and as of Monday, 850 Israeli soldiers have died in the war in the Gaza Strip. On the same day, families of hostages made their voices heard. One former hostage said this:
"The release of all hostages is the key for healing, both for the people of Israel and for the civilians in Gaza."
Meanwhile, the UN's International Court of Justice has been holding hearings on whether it's legal for Israel to block humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. Israel has been blocking aid to the territory, saying Hamas uses it to support its terrorist activity. Israel's government spokesman says the blockade is legal.
It's absolutely consistent with international law, specifically Article 23 of the 4th Geneva Convention, which states that a country is not required, I repeat, not required to allow aid in if it will be diverted to enemy combatants, as has clearly been the case in this instance.
And in another development, Iran's foreign minister says Iran is set to have nuclear talks with Germany, France, and the UK on Friday. The talks are set to take place in Rome, and afterwards, Iran is set to have its 4th round of nuclear talks with the U.S. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A man arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents earlier this month for leading protests at Columbia University against the war in Gaza has been released. A judge in Burlington, Vermont today ordered the release of Mohsen Madawi from a state correctional facility. The judge later issued an order barring the government from removing him from the state or country. The Columbia student was born in a refugee camp in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and moved to the United States in 2014. He organized campus protests until March of last year and co-founded the Palestinian Student Union at Columbia. The Supreme Court seemed divided today over an Oklahoma State Charter School Board's arguments that their approval of state funding for a Catholic school should stand. The deciding vote could come from Chief Justice John Roberts. NTD's Arlene Richards has more on today's hearing.
After more than 2 hours of arguments on Wednesday, the Supreme Court seemed divided on whether or not an Oklahoma Catholic charter school could receive state funding. The state's charter school board approved a religious school for funding, claiming they can't stop the school from exercising its religion. But under Oklahoma law, a charter school can't be affiliated with a religious institution. Oklahoma's Attorney General sued the board for refusing to withdraw a contract it has with the school. He argues the state can't sponsor a religious school. Supreme Court justices are trying to figure out whose argument is right.
So I guess I'm still stuck on trying to understand what you mean by the state has the ability to organize or set up the program in the way that it wants.
Generally speaking, a charter school is a publicly funded school that operates independently from the local public school system. In 2023, Oklahoma's Charter School Board approved St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School into the state's funding program. The board argued on Wednesday that excluding a religious school violates the First Amendment because it prevents the school from freely exercising its religion. Its attorney said in a statement after the hearing that Oklahoma families deserve more options for education.
Education in our country is lagging, and we need diverse, high-quality options. That's why our client, the state board, approved St. Isidore because it submitted a very strong proposal. In fact, the 2 Catholic organizations that founded St. Isidore operate their own schools, and in those schools, they have achieved 100% graduation rate.
The state attorney general told the board he was against the approval. He sued the board and said it violated Oklahoma law, its constitution, and the First Amendment. He said the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment prohibits the state from sponsoring a religious school. The AG told the press on Wednesday that the hearing went as predicted.
There are some justices that are focused on the free exercise component of the First Amendment, and there are justices focused on the Establishment Clause. Based on the questions, I think the court is split. How it breaks down, is it a 4-4, 5-3? I can't tell you that, but clearly there are identified different factions on the court.
Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself without explanation. The High Court's justices may be split, but Chief Justice John Roberts appears to be on the fence. If Roberts sides with the liberal justices, the court would be tied 4-4, an outcome that would leave the state court decision in place. Or his vote could decide whether St. Isidore becomes the first publicly funded religious school in Oklahoma. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And joining us now to discuss the president's overall foreign policy approach during his second term is Joel Rubin. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. We also have Bart Marcois, a former career diplomat and Energy Department official. Thank you both so much for being here. Great to have you. Joel, I want to start with you. Now that the U.S. and Ukraine signed the minerals deal, how does that impact the Russia-Ukraine war? Are we closer to a lasting ceasefire?
Well, Tiffany, it's great to be with you and with Bart. Look, minerals deal is a development. It's a positive development from an economic development perspective. Certainly, this new deal, as it's constructed, where it's a 50-50 partnership, is significantly better for Ukraine than it was a month and a half ago when President Trump proposed it. And I think that means ultimately it's better for the United States because it is something that can be sustained inside of Ukraine. But it's not a security deal. It's not a replacement for robust security guarantees to Ukraine that are needed to ensure that if there is going to be an ultimate settlement between Ukraine and Russia, that the Ukrainians feel secure. It's just an economic deal. So I think that we have to look at that as a building of a partnership, which is positive, but not as a replacement for the security relations between the United States and Ukraine.
And Bart, your thoughts on this? Is this sending a message of deterrence?
Oh, I think it is. I respectfully disagree with Joel. Yes, technically it's not a security agreement. It's not bringing them into NATO and letting them invoke Article 5. But this is unmistakably a security guarantee. The United States has a long history of protecting our interests, our economic interests. President Trump's position was quite simple. He said, why should we protect Ukraine? You're not in our realm of interest. But if we have interests there, we will protect them. This reminds me of the model that Kuwait pursued 30 plus years ago. They brought as many American companies into Kuwait as possible, reasoning that the United States would protect American citizens, American companies, American profits, and American interests. And the difference is the Kuwaitis did it eagerly. They welcomed American companies in. President Zelensky had to have his arm twisted to do it. But I am relieved. I'm pleased. I would say almost thrilled to see this, because this is in everyone's interest except Vladimir Putin's.
Definitely a lot more to watch there. Yeah.
I would have to add, though, that if Vladimir Putin were to argue that he will go back into Ukraine but protect the investments and build a same partnership with the United States that Ukraine has, he could make that argument. And I think for President Trump, he'd be more than willing to listen to that. So I do understand the economic benefits, but this in no way is a replacement for military power.
Definitely a lot to watch
made that argument
there.
to us
I
too.
do
He
want
came and he
to.
said,
I
Please,
do want
sorry,
to
go
move
ahead,
on,
Tiffany.
though. So, Joel, zooming past, looking a bit broader here, we did just pass the first 100 days of Trump 2.0. What would you say are the biggest changes when it comes to how this administration has been conducting foreign policy?
Well, the biggest change is that President Trump's decided to declare war on the global economy and isolate the United States from our best friends and our allies. There are many good reasons for why we should be bringing more manufacturing into the United States, why we should be scrutinizing our trade agreements with our partners and allies. But just look at what happened up north only a couple of days ago here in North America, where Canada, perhaps the most benign neighbor one could ever have imagined and asked for, suddenly saying that the relationship with the United States is now broken and now is thinking about economic punishment that they have to provide and return to the United States. I think this is a disaster. You add to that the termination of USAID and other foreign aid programs, and we are just driving countries around the world into the arms of China.
On that note, Bart, we do have the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, perhaps ceasefire with Russia, Ukraine soon, but of course, bubbling tensions with China. As a former diplomat, how are you viewing this administration's approach so far to foreign policy?
Well, I don't see anybody rushing into the Chinese arms right now. On the contrary, I see them coming here. I just read an announcement by the White House that we have over $5 trillion of new investment announced in the United States, new investment in the last 100 days. That's people rushing to jump into the arms of the United States. I work as a professional. Part of my professional work is working with companies in foreign countries that want to bring their presence here, and they are literally lining up. We cannot process them fast enough. They want to come and build factories here. Yes, President Trump is completely changing the tariff relationship and the trade relationship, but the trade relationship for the United States was deeply out of balance. We were not imposing very many tariffs on other people, on other countries. They were imposing very steep tariffs on us. It was unfair, and he is trying to rebalance this, and it's working. It is bringing American manufacturing back. And in addition, he's telling them, listen, I will streamline the permitting process. He just announced a new office in the White House. I can't remember the name of it, something like the Office of Investment Streamlining or Investment Facilitation, telling people, we will hold your hand and walk you through the permitting process so that you don't have to wait 14 years to build an LNG plant or to build a refinery or a power plant. We want power generated here. We want American workers employed, and we want American energy sources being used for it.
And Joel, your response?
Yeah, Tiffany, that $5 trillion sounds like a lot of hot air. I look at the hard data, and the hard data are that the Commerce Department and President Trump's own administration today announced a shrinkage by 0.3% of GDP in the United States. This was the single worst opening 100 days for stock market performance since Gerald Ford in 1974. We have never seen such a contraction in so quick an amount of time. And now we see our allies around the world trying to figure out new trade blocks and how they are going to increase punishment on the United States. I don't think that there's any proof to back up that we're seeing massive insourcing. We just saw massive layoffs by UPS of 20,000, and likely, according to some of our biggest retail companies in the country, empty shelves coming soon to the United States. That is not an economic policy one should be proud of.
And we're coming down to the wire, so I do want to look ahead a bit, though, because we're coming down to the wire here.
A good policy goal.
Looking ahead, though, there are a lot of changes in the economy, though. But Bart, when it comes to ending the Russia-Ukraine war and the Middle East conflicts, what do you see as the next actionable step to get those to end?
Well, I think what President Trump accomplished and with the rare earth minerals agreement today was twofold. One, he's replacing the supply of rare earth minerals that has been monopolized by China so badly around the world. And two, he has solidified the relationship between Ukraine and the United States. I think now there is a more united, not a united front, but there is a larger amount of unity between America and Ukraine. President Trump is happy with what Ukraine has done, and he's not happy with President Putin's approach. President Putin has made it clear that he thinks he can just game Trump, that he can manipulate him. And anybody who thinks they can manipulate Donald Trump is making a mistake.
And Joel?
Well, I mean, of course he's easily manipulable. He hasn't yet punished Vladimir Putin one bit, except for a sort of childish cry of stop bombing, as if this is the first time Donald Trump knew that Russia was illegal invading a sovereign nation and killing its civilians. So Donald Trump, unfortunately, is sort of most interested in what the last person told him. And so I guess Volodymyr Zelensky now has his ear for a moment, which is good. I think that the president needs to get some backbone and tell Vladimir Putin it's time to stop your messing into Ukraine. And also, on the Iran nuclear negotiations, just to get into that for a bit, I think it's time that President Trump shows some backbone as well and support our ally Israel rather than negotiate with Iran after ripping up a deal that was working, that I was a big advocate for. He now has set the bar higher on Iran, but he's about to basically repeat President Obama's deal. But this, while Iran is much more vulnerable and the Israeli government is not happy about it at all.
Joel Rubin, Bart Marquez, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The U.S. GDP shrank by 0.3% in the first 3 months of 2025, down from the 2.4% expansion in the previous quarter. That's according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's the first quarterly contraction since the first quarter of 2022, but the decline was milder than many expected. One key factor, a surge in imports, which jumped more than 40% as businesses rushed to bring goods in ahead of looming tariff hikes. That surge weighed heavily on overall growth because imports are subtracted in GDP calculations. Another drag came from reduced government spending. Meanwhile, private domestic investments spiked by nearly 22%. President Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro weighed in on the new GDP figure.
This was the best negative print, as they say in the trade, for GDP I have ever seen in my life. It really should be very positive news for America. So what happened with the numbers today is we had a fairly extraordinary surge of imports that was totally driven by the rest of the world trying to get their products in here before the tariffs took full hold. So the great news about that is that's a one-shot deal. So next time we get the data, that won't be the case at all. And in fact, it'll reverse and that'll contribute to growth.
More economic data. A closely watched inflation gauge cooled last month. According to a report from the Commerce Department, consumer prices rose just 2.3% in March from a year earlier, down from 2.5% in February. That's a sign that prices were steadily easing before most of the tariffs were implemented. At the same time, consumer spending increased 0.7% from February to March, marking a healthy gain. President Trump defending his economic record by pointing to strong private sector investments and the prospect of upcoming trade deals. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the details.
Defending his 100-day economic record, President Trump waves off the report showing a decline in U.S. GDP in the first quarter of 2025. He pins it on the Biden administration, adding that a 0.3% decline came mostly from an increase in imports or buying from overseas, a sign that he says indicates strong private sector growth.
We're removing distortions from imports, inventories, and government spending was up plus 3%. But this is Biden's economy because we took over on January 20th. And I think you have to get us a little bit of time to get moving.
The president on Wednesday highlighting a slew of companies ramping up investments in the U.S., having their CEOs at the White House.
And so I want to thank you, sir, for everything that you've done and the strong encouragement and the great policies that make it possible for us.
At a 2-hour-long cabinet meeting on Wednesday, President Trump's cabinet touting the prospect of trade deals.
So the next 100 days will be harvesting.
And Trump points to the impact of his tariffs on the economy of China, which he calls the chief ripper-offer.
They are getting absolutely hammered in China. We're talking to China, but their factories are closing all over China because we're not taking their product. We don't want their product unless they're going to be fair with us. And that includes intellectual property and other things. There are a lot of things.
And China's IP theft is costing the U.S. up to $600 billion every year. And new official data shows new U.S. tariffs on China now at 145% are making a dent in Chinese economy. The latest index for China's manufacturing sector dropped to their lowest level since 2023.
World biggest cargo ships in the world. And they're coming and they're turning around in the Pacific Ocean. But at a certain point, I hope we're going to make a deal with China.
Meanwhile, amid concerns about potential impacts of tariffs on prices here in the U.S., President Trump predicts that China will eat the tariffs instead of passing them on, adding that any potential price increases will only affect non-essential goods like Chinese-made toys. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Cabinet members give President Trump updates after the first 100 days of his administration. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has some highlights, including an update on the Health Department's autism study.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says that the HHS is working to make, quote, major dramatic changes to improve the school lunch program, as well as making sure American children have good, high-quality milk. Kennedy also said that in September they will start having results for the autism study, and in March of 2026 they expect to have the full results.
Not only for autism, but for the etiology of a whole range of autoimmune diseases that have become epidemic in our children.
Attorney General Pam Bondi says that in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, 3,400 kilos of fentanyl has been seized, with 258 million lives being saved.
Kids are dying every day because they're taking this junk laced with something else. They don't know what they're taking. They think they're buying a Tylenol or an Adderall and a Xanax, and it's laced with fentanyl, and they're dropping dead.
Bondi also says that 29 cartel members were brought back to Mexico and shared other DOJ captures.
We just broke up a huge human trafficking ring by the Sinaloa cartel. 1,000 pounds of meth, 20,000 Molly pills. Those are the drug of choice among clubs and bars for young kids. They were fake, but you know what they had in them? Fentanyl.
Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum says that they are working overtime to onshore critical minerals so the U.S. can stop relying on China.
Of the top 20 critical and rare earth minerals that we need for defense, that we need for industry, China's controlling 85% of the refining for that. So we are running at warp speed 7 days a week to try to put ourselves back in business in that way.
Burgum also told President Trump that Trump is giving America the chance to win the AI arms race with China. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, as Republicans search for spending cuts, they hope to save money through revamping the student loan program. We have more details on what kinds of changes are in the works. And House Republicans are optimistic they'll reach consensus on a budget reconciliation bill before a Memorial Day deadline. That bill is key to unlocking much of President Trump's legislative agenda. Luis Martinez reports from Capitol Hill after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer on Capitol Hill. House Republicans are working to revamp the federal student loan system as part of their big budget bill and efforts to cut government spending. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
Republicans are working towards ending President Biden's attempts to forgive student loan debt. After the courts rejected Biden's plan to forgive student loan debt, he enacted a workaround through the SAVE program that allowed so many borrowers to pay back $0 on their student loans and not accrue interest. Now, Republican lawmakers are trying to overhaul that entire Biden-era student loan payback program. In addition, Republican lawmakers aim to cap the amount that students can borrow in the first place. The limit is going to be the median price of a college, university, or program of study. The Republican chairman of the Education Committee says the goal with these new limits is to encourage colleges to lower their costs.
Our current broken system encourages students to accept more and more debt without ever addressing college costs. It's no secret that spending in Washington has been a disaster. Waste, fraud, and abuse has left the American taxpayer on the hook for government bloat.
And Republicans are working to make several changes to the Pell Grant. So the goal is to try to limit the Pell Grant only to those who need it most and change the requirements from 12 credit hours per semester to 30 credit hours per year. Now, Democrats said it's unfair for untraditional students with other obligations outside of school, such as who have obligations to family or for jobs. Here's the ranking Democrat member on the committee speaking about it yesterday.
Because they may need more financial support to cover the basic needs like housing, childcare, and transportation. At a time when families are struggling to make ends meet, I'm confused as to why we're making it harder for working parents who are trying to further their education
Now, the Republican chairman, for his part, noted that the Pell Grant is on track to run a shortfall of $70 to $100 billion within the decade, so he's trying to avoid that. Republicans are also trying to change the Pell Grant to include vocational programs, for example, schools for cosmetology or welding training, any career path that does not require a traditional college degree. If students choose to take those paths, they will qualify for a so-called workforce Pell Grant for the first time. Now, Republicans passed all of these changes out of committee yesterday, and the goal is to make them part of that broader reconciliation bill, that big budget bill that we've heard so much about, with the goal to pass all of this by the summer. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
House Republicans showed unity as lawmakers began markups of the reconciliation bill, while Senate Republicans break party line on a disapproval resolution. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
I absolutely think we're on the right path. We proved people wrong when they said we couldn't get Mike Johnson elected, or we couldn't pass the House rules package, or we couldn't get the budget resolution passed. I feel the same sense of optimism now as I did leading up to each of those wins.
House Republicans remain united and optimistic that they will reach a consensus on a reconciliation bill that as of now calls for over $1 trillion in spending cuts and the extension of the 2017 tax cuts.
And Americans broadly agree that we need to reduce the size of government. We need to reduce the deficit. We need to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. We need to get government down to its proper size and get it to function more efficiently.
Democrats accuse Republicans of seeking to cut Medicaid and Social Security benefits, while Republicans insist that they will only target waste, fraud, and abuse.
100 days in, more than 200 different lawsuits have been filed against the unconstitutional and unlawful executive orders of Donald Trump. And the American people are winning in court.
On the Senate side, Senators Rand Paul, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and Mitch McConnell have backed a resolution of disapproval of President Trump's tariff agenda.
A trade war is ultimately paid for by taxpayers.
The vast majority of the Senate Republican Conference remains united behind the president's tariff agenda.
Tariffs are working. It's helping American companies. And bottom line, at the end of the day, we have got to do something to help American people and get manufacturing back to the United States. We're going to struggle for a while, but good things will happen in the future.
I said, oh, well, the tariffs, how will this affect economic growth? Those are all very recent. In fact, most of them not in the first quarter. So I think that this points to the weakness of the economy inherited.
It's important to note that the House Republican leadership has set Memorial Day as their deadline to pass the reconciliation bill, while for the Senate, the deadline is July 4th. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Coming up, as more Californians go electric, gas tax revenue is shrinking. Now the state is testing a new way to charge drivers. Plus, self-driving big rigs may soon be rolling down California highways. Christina Corona reports from Los Angeles. Britain's former Prime Minister Tony Blair calls out hysteria in the global climate debate as he pushes for a new approach toward net zero. It follows recent blackouts in Spain and Portugal, thought to be connected to renewable energy. Welcome Hudson in London. And France is taking action against Chinese platforms such as Shein and Temu. Authorities are concerned about a growing flood of cheap, unsafe products hitting the market. David Vives brings us the details from Paris when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. As California embraces electric vehicles, it's facing a new challenge: how to fund road repairs as gas tax revenue declines. Plus, the state is also considering allowing self-driving trucks on highways. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more on the proposals.
As more Californians switch to electric vehicles, the state is facing a major money dilemma. The gas tax that was once a reliable source for road maintenance is no longer pulling in what it used to. California's gas tax is currently 59 cents per gallon, with most of that money going to fix roads and highways. But with fewer people buying gas, revenue is dropping. In 2016, gas taxes made up 41% of transportation funding. By 2024, that dropped to 36%. To address this, California is considering a road charge, which is a mileage-based fee that would charge drivers based on how far they travel. This means residents would pay based on how many miles they drive drive, so if you drive more, you pay more. I interviewed a gas station customer who said they're not on board with the road charge idea, arguing it's unfair to penalize people for just driving to work or picking up their kids, especially with the cost of living already so high. The state is also investing in clean transportation. In March, Governor Gavin Newsom said there are now more EV chargers than gas nozzles statewide. Around 178,000 EV chargers are installed in the state compared to 120,000 gas nozzles. Meanwhile, California may soon allow self-driving big rigs to be tested on public roads for the first time. The DMV released a plan to let companies test trucks over 10,000 pounds with a special permit. The testing will be done primarily on highways, excluding city streets. While the state already allows self-driving taxis like Waymo, it has banned large autonomous trucks, leading companies to test elsewhere. Some groups like the Teamsters Union oppose the move, raising concerns over safety and the potential loss of jobs. A bill that would have required human drivers in self-driving semi-trucks was vetoed by the governor in 2023, clearing the way for testing. Reporting from the city of Arcadia, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Is there hysteria in the international climate debate? Britain's former Prime Minister Tony Blair suggests there is, as he calls for a new approach. It comes after Spain and Portugal were recently hit by cascading blackouts, which some say were made worse by an over-reliance on solar power. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us from London.
In a new policy paper, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair said hysteria should be taken out of the international climate debate, saying that voters feel they are being made to make financial sacrifices and changes to their lifestyle in what Blair referred to as doomed policy, despite the fact that in developed nations, these changes will lead to a minimal impact to global carbon emissions. Blair said that by 2030, almost two-thirds of global emissions will come from China, India and Southeast Asia, and said that means any strategy based on phasing out fossil fuels in the short term is doomed to fail. But while he appeared to hit out against net zero carbon emission policies, Blair went on to clarify that Prime Minister Keir Starmer's approach to net zero is the right one, supporting the government's plan for net zero by 2050. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner responded.
Tony's clarified his comments and he welcomes our direction of travel, and that's on renewables, investing in renewables and nuclear as part of the mix. Look, we can't rely on fossil fuels forever.
The British government rejected Blair's claim of hysteria in the climate debate. But Ben Pyle, co-founder of Climate Debate UK, says there is a lot of hysteria driving climate policy.
And this sort of tendency of a lot of people within the global green movement to sort of talk about deadlines, 10 years left to save the planet and so on and so forth.
Many people have made the 10 years claim over the decades, including former US Vice President Al Gore in 2006. Blair said that most political leaders know that the debate has become irrational, but are terrified of saying so for fear of being called climate deniers. A British government spokesperson said that they remain focused on their mission for the UK to be a clean energy superpower, while treading lightly on people's lives. Pyle disputed this and said it will be expensive.
Over the next 5 years, the Clean Power by 2030 agenda is going to lock Britain into extremely expensive renewable energy subsidy schemes.
Over-reliance on renewable energy has drawn criticism in recent days, following the huge blackouts throughout Spain and Portugal. Energy expert Catherine Porter said the initial fault in Spain's power grid was made worse by an over-reliance on solar power, which led to cascading blackouts that lasted for over 8 hours in the Iberian Peninsula. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
France is looking to crack down on Chinese e-commerce giants like Shein and Temu. This comes after authorities observed a massive influx of low-cost Chinese products into the country. France is also urging the EU to impose regulations on these platforms. NTD's international correspondent David Vives reports from Paris.
The trade war between the US and China has also affected Europe, as several European countries report a surge in dumped Chinese products on their market. Last year, 1.5 billion parcels, mostly from China, entered France, averaging just around $10 each. Authorities are concerned with this trend, which poses a threat not only to local producers, but also to consumers. On Tuesday, 4 French ministers unveiled a plan to tackle the flood of low-cost parcels from China. To protect consumers, the government will triple inspections this year, checking product safety, labeling, and environmental claims. It's also looking to the EU to end customs duty exemption for parcels under $170 to protect local businesses. Yann Rivoalan is president of the French Women's Prêt-à-Porter Federation. He says the influx of Chinese products has led to around 10,000 job losses over the past 2 years and the closure of several fashion brands. He also says French fashion brands are unable to compete.
Every week, brands send me copies of counterfeit products made in China. First, our designs are being stolen. Second, the employees of Shein or Temu are being exploited. They're paid a pittance and forced to work from 75 to over 100 hours a week, with barely 1 day off a month. This is clearly unacceptable. They also commit tax fraud by declaring underreported sales figures.
According to the government, over 90% of these products are unsafe for consumers. However, Rivoalan says the new measures fall far short and should be aligned with the stronger U.S. actions against such platforms.
It's totally ridiculous compared to what the United States is doing with $100 on each of these packages. So we're in a situation where we know that over 90% of products are dangerous for the French, dangerous for consumers, for our jobs, and for the planet. And yet we're putting in place a small measure with barely 10% tax potential. If the French state is doing its duty, which is to protect us, then it must act immediately to stop these platforms from selling these products.
The EU launched a probe into Chinese platforms in February. However, Rivoalan says the process of curbing their access to the European market is too slow compared to the looming threat to the industrial sector. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up in the NFL, the league hands down major fines in the aftermath of a draft day prank call. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in the NFL as the league fined the Atlanta Falcons $250,000 in response to a prank call made to Shedeur Sanders last weekend. What happened here?
Yeah, that prank call made last weekend to Sanders was apparently made by the son of a Falcons assistant coach, Jeff Ulbrich. Now, Ulbrich incidentally was fined $100,000 himself as well. Now, the Falcons said in a statement, Ulbrich's son, Jax Ulbrich, wrote down the number from his father's open iPad while visiting his parents' home. Now, Jax Ulbrich on Sunday later posted an apology about the thing on social media. And there was actually a video of this whole thing going down, I think it was Friday night, with Sanders getting a call from someone who was pretending to be New Orleans Saints general manager Mickey Loomis. Of course, the Saints did not end up actually taking him. So it was really all part of, probably a tough opening weekend for Shedeur Sanders there. I mean, he was expected to be a first-round pick. He slides all the way to the 5th round, and he's pranked in between. He seemed to take it actually pretty well, though. But anyway, a tough, rough start to an NFL career.
Well, hopefully it ends well then. Elsewhere in the league, Jets quarterback and former Florida State standout Jordan Travis announced he's retiring due to an injury suffered in college.
Yeah, very sad announcement. He sustained that gruesome injury in college on a scramble. This is against North Alabama back in November of 2023. Suffered a fractured and dislocated ankle. It was on a hip drop tackle. Never played again, college or pros. He still finished that year 5th in the Heisman Trophy race after leading the Seminoles to an 11-0 record. Of course, they famously got left out of the playoffs despite that undefeated start, mainly because Jordan Travis, they knew was going to be unavailable there. The Jets ended up taking him in the 5th round in last year's draft, knowing he would try to rehab the entire season. He did, but unfortunately, what he says, though, his leg never responded, though, the way he had hoped. Doctors advised him to do this, so now he's calling it quits. Now, interestingly, though, Tiff, the Jets must not have known this last week because they did not take a quarterback in the draft. They commented on this by saying they support his decision and wish him the best.
A developing story there then. Shifting gears to the NBA playoffs, the Milwaukee Bucks were eliminated last night by the Indiana Pacers, and afterwards there was quite a skirmish on the court. What happened there?
Yeah, Bucks two-time MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo was seen jawing with what looked like a fan on the court. It was actually the father of one of the opposing players, Tyrese Halliburton's dad. Now, Milwaukee had just lost in heartbreaking fashion. They had a 7-point lead in overtime with 40 seconds left. Somehow, after a couple of turnovers, they ended up losing the game, and that eliminated them from the playoffs. So emotions were certainly running high. Let's actually listen to what Giannis said afterwards about this skirmish.
Losing the game, emotions ran high. Having a fan, which at the moment I thought he was a fan, but then I realized he was Tyrese's son, which I love. Tyrese, I think he's a great competitor. He was his dad, sorry. Coming in the floor and showing me his son a towel with his face. This is what we do. This is what we effing do. This the F we do. This. I feel like that's very, very disrespectful. You know, my dad. If you guys go and ask and learn, my dad's not with us no more. My dad used to come in the family room and was the most respectful person ever. You know, having somebody's dad, which I'm happy for him, and I'm happy for his son, and I'm happy that he's happy for his son. That's how you're supposed to feel. But coming to me and disrespecting me and cursing at me, I think is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Okay? And I'm not the guy that points fingers, because in my neighborhood, snitches get stitches. So I don't want to say something, for him to say, to get fined or anything. But it's not respectful. I talked with him at the end, and I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, so that was an unusual situation for sure. I would certainly think the NBA is going to respond to the Pacers somehow, despite what Giannis was saying there about snitches, stitches, and everything. But yeah, anyway, Indiana, though, they move on to the second round with that win.
Well, looking at tonight's playoff action, we have a pair of games on, and both series could be won tonight.
Yeah, Jimmy Butler and Golden State could close out tonight. Now, Butler came back Monday night, led the Warriors for a win. He had that, even though he did not look too good with that pelvic contusion, late in the game he had that, went high for that rebound to seal it, and those 2 free throws there at the end. So now Golden State Warriors, they are up 3-1 over the Rockets. They play game 5 tonight, 7:30 Eastern time. And then you also have Lakers and Timberwolves. Timberwolves can also clinch tonight with a win. That game starts at 10 p.m. Eastern time. Now, also last night, you had the the Pistons beating the Knicks. They're now 3-2. They'll have their next game will be tomorrow night. And you also have the Celtics closing over the Magic. So you have the Celtics, Pacers, and Cavs, and the Thunder advancing to the second round of the NBA playoffs. So a lot going on in the playoffs here, Tiff.
Lots of action for sure, Dave. As always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.